Hey yo Prodigies, Prod Charles here, and as promised, here is another Bendy and the Ink Machine Theory compilation. Prodigies, I've made this for the newer Prodigies who've been asking questions that I've answered in previous theories that they're having a hard time finding. So to the new Prodigies, please enjoy learning more about Bendy and the Ink Machine, and do introduce yourself in the comments because I love to welcome new Prodigies. And if you've been here for a while, please do enjoy the theories that we've come up with over the last few months together. Remember to subscribe and tap that bell for more cool and interesting horror game theories and secrets. And if you think that this video will be too long for you, remember to tap Add To and select Watch Later to save your progress. Or just do it for fun. Get ready for the theories in 3, 2, 1. Another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory? You betcha! Hey yo Prodigies, Prod Charles here, and in this video I'll be sharing with you a Bendy and the Ink Machine theory. This one will explain why Sammy Lawrence may be Boris the Wolf. Let's start with what we know. We know that Sammy Lawrence is the director of music at Joey Drew's cartoon studio. We also know that Sammy has been setting up rituals in order to sacrifice Henry in Chapter 2. In Chapter 1, we see the corpse of Boris the Wolf lying upright on an operating table, but in Chapter 2, Boris the Wolf appears before Henry right at the end. And finally, Boris the Wolf is a character that would feature in the cartoon Bendy and Sheep Songs. Got all those facts? Now let's bring it all together. Sammy Lawrence is the director of music at Joey Drew's cartoon studio, and so would be in charge of all of the music that would play during the Bendy cartoons. He would therefore not only be familiar with just the songs in the Bendy cartoons, but also their lyrics, as he would have to keep track of each performance and make sure that they would be put in the right places in the cartoons. Throughout the game, we get hints that the workers at the cartoon studio had to go through some kind of strange rituals in which they had to provide offerings to gods, but it is unclear as to why. We have suggested in previous theories that these rituals were performed to transform the workers at the cartoon studio into Joey Drew's cartoon characters. If you would like to see why, check out my Is Joey Drew Bendy theory, which will appear in the card in the top right. If this is the case, each worker would have transformed into a cartoon that they shared some kind of connection with, such as Susie Campbell becoming Alice Angel, as Sammy would have offered his vinyl record of The Lighter Side of Hell, of which there are heaps of musical scores throughout the music department. This would be his connection to the cartoon character he would have turned into. Many Prodigies believe that because Sammy Lawrence can be seen wearing overalls just like Boris, he must have turned into Boris. I personally had a hard time believing this at first, as it didn't make sense to me that Sammy, who didn't have a passion for writing his stupid cartoon songs, and was really crabby about work when Joey Drew installed a pump in his office, had any passion for or connection to Boris. Also, the overalls that Sammy wears look slightly different to the ones that Boris is seen wearing. However, there is more evidence that Sammy could be Boris. Sammy being the director of music means that he would be familiar with the songs in the Bendy cartoons to the point that it would drive him crazy. In Chapter 2, we see him roaming the studio chanting the Sheep 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 song. On the only poster that we've seen so far of a cartoon that features Boris, the cartoon itself is called Bendy in Sheep Songs. Perhaps Sammy is quoting a sheep song from this cartoon because it is one that he connected with the most. This also eliminates Sammy being Bendy or Alice Angel as an option, as although Sammy would have written songs like The Lighter Side of Hell, given that Bendy is a demon and Alice is an angel demon, it doesn't seem to be a song that he recalls or wants to recall in his inky prison body. Besides, we hear Bendy crushing Sammy into a puddle of ink as he tries to sacrifice Henry to Bendy anyway. Also, Susie Campbell clearly has a strong connection with Alice Angel. Unfortunately, we've seen in Chapter 1 that Boris is well and truly dead. How can it be possible that Sammy is Boris if he's walking around the studio just fine, while Boris is knocked out on an upright table on the upper floors of the studio? Maybe this is actually exactly the evidence we needed. After Bendy crushes Sammy and Henry escapes from Bendy, Henry encounters Boris casually walking around the corner, as if Boris was never harmed at all. In my Why is Boris Alive theory, it was suggested that there are either two Borises, or that Boris may be another of the workers at the studio who comes to help Bendy. If you want to know more, tap the card that will appear in the top right. While those cases may be true, many Prodigies pointed out that Sammy might actually have been sacrificed by Bendy to bring Boris back to life, and this is quite possible. Many Prodigies believe that Sammy's heart was used to fill the hole in Boris's chest, allowing him to come back to life as we returned the power to the ink machine that allowed Boris to get ink flowing through its body. With a pumping heart full of mysterious ink magic, Boris would have come back to life and roamed the halls of the studio again if this happened. I think this may be partially true. If Sammy's heart was required to bring Boris back and transform him into Boris, I think Sammy's entire body would have been consumed to achieve this. Why? Remember when Boris was propped up on the table in Chapter 1? Boris's chest looked as if it had bursted open, and I think that Sammy might have been the one that burst out of Boris's chest in the first place. Why else would it say "Who's laughing now" and "Dreams come true" on the walls? Sammy refers to his body as an inky prison, and would have attempted to return to his old body in 2 stages. The first stage would be to get out of his prison within a prison, Boris's body. The second stage would be to release himself from the cocoon-like form that we see him in Chapter 2. This is where Henry came in. Either sacrificing Henry would have let Sammy swap their bodies, which may explain his slight hesitation when he recognized his old co-worker before the ritual, or sacrificing Henry would materialize Sammy's body and cause Henry to become trapped in Boris. This process may also support the reason why Sammy would have been sneaking around in Chapter 1, leading Henry to fix the machine. However, when Sammy tried to perform the sacrifice, Bendy may have chosen Sammy to be sacrificed instead, despite all of his devotion, Bendy-senpai, out of anger for what Sammy had done, and to return the effects of Joey Drew's first ritual to normal. Who's laughing now, Sammy? Definitely Bendy. As a consequence of all of this, Sammy would become Boris once more and come to greet us after we escape Bendy's wrath. How would he have gotten there so quickly though? Easy. The elevator that Henry walks towards at the end of Chapter 2. What do you think? Prodigies, I think that this could possibly explain a lot about what's happening at the studio, and it isn't pretty. All of this suggests that the ink minions we face could actually be lower workers at the studio who had hardly felt any passion or connection to any of the Toon characters. This may also mean that each of the major characters are in inky prisons within their Toon prison bodies, and they want to return back to normal to end their suffering. Another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory? You betcha! Hey yo Prodigies, Charles here, and in this video I'll be sharing with you a Bendy and the Ink Machine theory. This one will cover whether Bendy killed Boris. Let's start with what we know. We know that Boris first appears in Chapter 1, sitting upright on a table. We also know that Boris and Bendy were featured in Joey Drew's cartoons together, particularly Bendy in Sheep Songs. One of the messages on the walls of the studio reads, "Who's laughing now?" And finally, Boris appears before Henry at the end of Chapter 2, but does not appear to be hostile. Got all those facts? Now let's bring it all together. One of the most mysterious parts of Bendy and the Ink Machine is Boris's first appearance. Boris looks to be dead and sitting upright on a table that is hooked up to some kind of ink pipes. When you fix the ink machine, ink starts to splurt out of Boris's chest, which means that this table is hooked up to the corpse in a more intricate way than expected. It is commonly believed that Boris was murdered by one of the employees, particularly Joey Drew. After all, when Henry first sees Boris, he says,
"Oh my god, Joey, what were you doing?"
which seems to support this. However, Henry hadn't seen who did this, so there is still the possibility that there was another culprit. While I think that Sammy played a part in Boris being dead, some prodigies believe that Bendy may have been the one to kill Boris. Consider this, Bendy and Boris are cartoon characters, each of which would have done all kinds of wacky things on screen. Given their transfer to the real world, they wouldn't immediately realize that they had to obey the rules of our physical dimension. Bendy and Boris would then have gone about their normal behaviors with Toon logic. Assuming that they had similar relationships to cartoon characters like Tom and Jerry, Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, and even many Disney characters, it isn't unreasonable to think that they might try to pull off some of their crazy antics in their 3D forms. Just like how cartoons use TNT on each other and fall from high distances, maybe Bendy did something similar to Boris in order to fulfill its crazy state of mind. We can clearly see that Boris's chest is split wide open. Perhaps Bendy may have cut it with a knife or hooked Boris up to the table and pumped ink directly into the chest cavity until it exploded. Why? The messages on the wall. If Bendy wrote those messages, it would make sense that they are taunting in nature. Who's laughing now may be in reference to Boris laughing at Bendy, causing Bendy to become very angry. We see Boris appear just fine at the end of Chapter 2, and it doesn't seem as if Boris really wants to harm Henry at first. If Boris had this calm temperament from the beginning and was laughing in a friendly way, and considering that we don't know Bendy's temperament and how easily Bendy would get angry, we could take inspiration from cartoons like Donald Duck getting mad at Goofy laughing at him, but with harsher consequences. Bendy would then feel a strong sense of guilt and distrust towards the creator, continuing to write messages like, "The creator lied to us," referencing a lie that Joey may have told the cartoons that things would be just like they were in the 2D plane, or just from their own assumptions of how things would go. The lie may even be a reference to the message, "Dreams come true," which indicates that the cartoon may have wanted to be in a 3D form. Although these things are difficult to say, whatever the case, Bendy would become so enraged that the magic that brought it to life would cause some kind of corrupted transformation. Bendy would then roam the halls of the studio, encasing each of the workers in an inky prison. What do you think? Let's not forget that Boris appears at the end of chapter 2, and it seems to be friendly at first. Boris may actually try to help us calm Bendy down to reverse all of the shenanigans happening at the studio. If Sammy had witnessed Bendy writing these messages, he would probably have continued to write the messages around the areas of the music department while acting as Bendy's prophet to get Bendy-senpai to notice him. The only thing that I do not see adding up is the presence of supernatural forces at the studio. We have definitely seen cases of paranormal activity, teleportation, and potentially ink magic through the use of alchemy throughout the studio. If the cartoons were brought to life in the 3D realm, why wouldn't magic preserve their toon logic and physiology? Another Bendy and the Ink Machine theory? You betcha! Hey yo Prodigies, Podcharles here, and in this video I'll be sharing with you a Bendy and the Ink Machine theory. This one will give 3 reasons explaining why Henry may be dreaming. Let's start with what we know. We know that Henry was invited by Joey Drew to return to the cartoon studio that he used to work at. We also know that since Henry left, Joey Drew had gone out of his way to install an ink machine in the studio. The ink machine causes ink to flow throughout the studio through pipes. And finally, at the end of chapter 1, Henry takes a heavy fall, and he gets knocked out when he enters the pentagram that ends the chapter. Got all those facts? Now let's bring it all together. Before we understand why Henry may be dreaming or hallucinating, we first need to understand why he went to the cartoon studio and a few consequences because of that. Joey Drew invited Henry to the cartoon studio because he had something to show him. As Henry moves through the studio, we find out that this thing would be the ink machine, as he says,
"So this is the ink machine, huh?"
This means that the ink machine wasn't around when Henry was working at the studio for 2 reasons. 1. Henry wouldn't talk about the ink machine as if he hadn't seen it before, and 2. Being an animator at the cartoon studio, he probably would have known how to operate the machine straight away. This will be important later in the video, so be sure to remember this. We know that Joey really wanted to install the ink machine and all of the pipes around the studio, and he did so, but we also know that the pipes that allowed the ink to flow around the studio were faulty. This is because in Wally Frank's audio recording, he complains about this very problem and says that,
"If one more of these pipes burst, I'm out of here."
We also hear mention of this in Sammy Lawrence's recordings in chapter 2. We also see evidence of ink flooding the studio when Bendy chases Henry, and this happens in both chapter 1 and chapter 2. Why is this important though? At the end of chapter 1, we see that Henry experiences a very big fall after being chased by Bendy. This is one of the first ways that Henry may have entered a dream state, as he may have gone unconscious after surviving the fall. Remember, this guy is somewhere around his 50s at the least, so it's no easy feat for an old body, unless he really worked out during his 30 years away from the studio. However, as we do not see the screen blackout when this happens, it's hard to say whether this is possible for sure. It just seems equally as unlikely that Henry would take a fall like that with no problems. The second way that Henry may have entered a dream state would be when he enters the pentagram at the end of chapter 1. This game is no stranger to supernatural phenomena, and considering that the event happens before our eyes and the screen actually blacks out this time, it appears to be a stronger case in support of Henry dreaming his way through the crazy events at the studio. Then we have the big one. Considering that all of the pipes around the studio are pumping tons of ink, the pipes themselves are faulty, and that there are ink splatters everywhere, there is a possibility that Henry is in a hallucinatory dream state due to overexposure to the ink. How would he have been exposed? As the pipes are faulty, ink may escape in both liquid and gaseous forms. In the liquid form, ink would probably just gush out, like in front of Sammy Lawrence's office. In a gas form, these would probably be due to solvents moving from the ink and spreading through the studio due to evaporation after sitting still in the pipes for a while. We know that in both cases, Henry would be heavily exposed to the chemicals, thus leading to the toxic reactions that would cause him to see all kinds of weird and wacky things, like bendy cutouts moving around. You might ask whether or not Henry should be used to this, as he used to work at the studio in the past, but remember what we said in the beginning of the video. The ink machine was probably not installed at that time, as well as the pipes connecting to it, and so Henry would not have had such a large exposure to so much ink. Even if Henry would spend hours at his desk drawing Bendy with the same kind of ink, it would not be enough to cause him to go loopy. Consider the difference between using a fountain pen and the amount of ink that would be flowing through those huge pipes. It's quite significant. Also, because he wasn't around when the ink machine was installed, he wouldn't be familiar with any safety measures associated with using or being around the machine, or even how to use the machine at all, so he would go through the game as if all of the strange things happening around him were normal. What do you think? Remember to subscribe and tap that bell for more interesting horror game theories and secrets. If you love horror game theories, be sure to check the description for a link to all of the theories and secrets and prodigies. I really hope that these series help you to expand on how you think, so it can help you with how you go about your thinking in your daily lives. See ya!